welcome back, everyone. And that was really wonderful small group conversations, some great takeaways. And at this point, we're going to move into the community organizing training with my colleague and trainer at Everyday Democracy, Matthew Sagacity Walker. So we want to welcome Sagacity. And let me just preface that by saying that community organizing requires a wide range of skills and knowledge to bring about community change. We heard our keynote speaker talk about how you have to be thoughtful about whatever campaigns you're doing, if it's an issue organizing, or if you're doing organizing in the neighborhood for dialogue conversations or for addressing particular issues in the community. You have to be really thoughtful, and you have to bring all the skills and the knowledge that exist within the community. And that's part of infusing a racial equity lens, in fact, because you are bringing people who are most familiar with the impact that racism has on them. And so I'm very, very pleased to introduce and welcome my esteemed colleague and a good friend, Matthew Sagacity Walker. Matthew.
All right. Hello. Thank you for the introduction, Val. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for participating. So I will begin. Oh, hey, Cameron, I haven't seen you in a long time. I will begin by starting out and letting you know that my 2-year-old is running about the house right now. So if you hear somebody yelling and screaming, that is nothing bad happening. It's just my toddler who's upset at me right now because I have to leave him alone for a little bit. So today, what I wanted to talk about a little bit was community organizing from the dialogue to change standpoint. And that's pretty much what Everyday Democracy likes to use in terms of the way that we look at community organizing work and how we like to operate as an organization. And when we do our workshops and trainings with communities, that's the model that and the approach that we use when we're doing this work. Some of it, it is going to overlap a little bit with what Rashad was talking about. So I'm just going to go ahead and begin to share my screen, and we'll begin with the presentation. I do want to be very clear, though, that if at any point you have any questions, comments, whatever have you, I would like this to be as interactive as possible. So I do appreciate a good conversation. I'll try to get a lot of information in there, but I also want you all to have a chance to speak, and I'll try to give you all some time to speak with one another at the end of this. So very quickly, for context, Everyday Democracy does think about the work that we do in terms of making sure that all voices are valued, and we're making sure that participation and racial equity become a permanent part of the way we do our work, whether it's local, state, or national. We really are all about people getting their voices out there, getting the voices of everyday people involved in the changes that can occur and happen at the community level. Right? So what I want to do really quickly is check in with you all. That's what I want to do first. And then I'm going to go through a presentation about the dialogue to change approach that Everyday Democracy likes to use. And then have an exercise about developing talking points. So one of the things that Rashad had talked about was when you are going to be working with somebody or partnering with somebody, how do you target people and what is the conversation like? You talked about having an introduction, making an ask and things of that nature. So I do want to give folks a bit of time to do that. And then I want to hopefully, if we have time, debrief and have a conversation with one another, sort of troubleshoot ideas and workshop ideas with one another as a small group. Any questions or comments before we get going? All right, and just so we know, when I am sharing my screen, I'm not able to actually see the chat box. So if you have a question or a comment or whatever, just jump in and interrupt me. If I'm going on and it seems like I'm talking too much, you don't jump in, do it like double dutch and just jump in. So how have folks seen issues addressed in their community in the past? If there's something going on, as a civic ambassador, how do you ordinarily address community issues? And please, again, just unmute yourself and throw out your ideas.
One of the worst ways I've seen issues addressed in my community is for people to jump on social media and just start complaining.
Okay.
And it's very hard to change the conversation to something that's constructive when somebody just wants to spew negativity.
All right. Because, and if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is in terms of using social media, usually it's about spreading some sort of negativity, or it's more vitriol and not necessarily in terms of building. It's more of
Absolutely.
tearing down.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I see Lion Roland. The hand up.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I was going to put my hand down too. Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Lion Roland. I'm a president of the New London Lions Club currently. How I address some of the needs on some of the issues is I use data, as in demographics and things that are troubling the community, and try to build civic projects around those needs of the community, and especially the ones of the people that I'm serving. So that was like some of the ways that I go about some of those things per se,
Right.
and how I would go about addressing some of the issues in the community. Like, for example, in New London, there's a high diabetes rate. So therefore, I want to build up awareness on diabetes awareness to actually get the ball rolling, to get people actually invested in things that are concerning them. A lot of people don't have those privileges that was awarded to other communities. So by opening up activities that's in the interest of them, solely to them, is a start in the right direction for them to actually think in their own direction and actually gravitate to other activities outside of the world of civics. So like, that's just how I would approach it as a civic leader, respectfully, and what I have done too as well.
Okay, great. And what you just presented too as your option and how you deal with it sort of relates to the dialogue change approach everyday democracy likes to use. So it's sort of related to the social media thing, but we try to do it in terms of building community versus tearing down, and understand that we could always talk about the negative, but how do we use the negative as an entry point to building into something positive? I can take
that's also
one more. Oh, yes.
Oh, also, wait, I wanted to build upon that. I'm sorry. Also, we also focus on what they call community engagement, which means that we're engaging with the community on their issues and problems. So therefore, if like, I know that there's certain activities that I would like to get my club to get more involved with, be more visible with the community, and actually be more visible, because that was some of the issues that we had, which resulted in us aging out per se, because we're not actually, and that is a community issue because this is a community club. So we need to be approaching the community as such in that manner, by community engagement, finding out what's organically what people are doing in the community and try to help them and stuff of that nature. I think that's a more of approach that I think it's more effective. Also, it's a more of a way where you can get buy-in with the community on a more of an equitable standard. So that's some of the things I've done in my work.
Thank you for sharing. I could take one last comment about how issues are typically addressed in your community, or how you have personally.
So seriously, one thing I've attended at least a couple of town hall meetings, in my town here, Hamden, in the past, not so much recently, but people tend to go there and they start yelling at the mayor usually, or the town council or whatever. And then you see the politicians getting defensive, and sometimes they have to escort people out, and these people end up leaving the place more frustrated. Only those who are more vocal, their voices are heard because they yell, or they're already well known to be the sort of the loudmouth. And so, that doesn't always work, but that's one example.
Yeah, it's definitely town hall. All right. Okay. So thank you for those. And I'm going to talk a little bit about town hall as well. So really quickly, I do want to talk about some of the ways when there are changes that are going to take place in the community. These are some of the common ways they come up, right? Usually it's a top down, folks in the office coming up to a decision saying, Hartford needs a new baseball stadium. And this is what we're going to do. And they do what they need to do to make it happen. And boom, now we have a baseball stadium downtown that all the Hartford residents love to go to. And then there's another way, which is from the bottom up, which is often after the folks in their suits and in the room come up with the decision. Regular everyday people get together and say, we don't like this, we need to change this, we need to come together on a particular bill that will really, affect our daily lives. So we get together, organize around it, and, we may shut something down or whatever have you. And the issue with this, I mean, it's great because it brings us all together as community members, but the issue with this is there's not necessarily a long-term goal, and there's not that long-term community engagement, which I think his name was Lion had just brought up, right? Is how do you engage folks on a long-term goal, on a long-term timeline versus, for a one and done type of thing. And then, like Val just brought up, there is also the famous town hall meetings where, as a regular community member, you get to get up. What is it? I think they give you 3 minutes or something like that to say your spiel, say whether you're for or against something. And then the people who are on the panel or whatever have you, they will vote and decide on how they want to go. Will they take your advice into account? We're not sure, but that's the way it works, right? And the issue, like all of these have their place in, organizing and how things change and whatnot. But in terms of town hall meetings, it becomes difficult if you're not comfortable speaking out, or sometimes it's difficult when you do speak in public to be very clear and concise with your thoughts, things of that nature. And then there's also, like Val mentioned, there's the loud and the boisterous people, the people who have typical power, can be shut down or feel shut down, or they just close themselves off and they're no longer paying attention to what folks have to say, right? There's that. So what Everyday Democracy likes to do is talk about organizing in terms of using community dialogues, right? So whenever I talk about the work that we do, I like to put it into 3 main phases, right? We talk about organizing, then we talk about holding our dialogues, and then there's moving towards action, right? And this is what the process would look like if we laid it down on paper. I always urge folks, and I want to be 100% clear, that doing community work, I mean, you all know as civic ambassadors, right? Doing community work is never as clear cut as 1, 2, 3. But I do like to give some sort of structure to whatever work is being done, right? So in the organizing phase, what Everyday Democracy likes to do is similar to like Rashad laid it out earlier, is first thing you want to do is set goals. What is it that you want to work towards? What is it that you're working after, right? And being very clear with that. And then with those goals in mind, when you have a small group of people who are willing to do the heavy lifting, Everyday Democracy does an organizing training with them. And there we talk about how to recruit people, the importance of using the racial equity lens, things of that nature. How many different teams are you going to need and subcommittees are you going to need on that organizing team? Because again, we need research, right? As Lion pointed out earlier, Rashad mentioned that during his presentation earlier too, is the importance of research. We also need to talk about how are we going to evaluate our own work. How do we justify a success, or what do we say is a loss, or what are lessons learned, those type of things. And then we go out and we help people recruit participants and recruit facilitators for the community dialogues that we're going to be holding. And then we also hold the facilitator training for the prospective facilitators. And that's how we do the core bulk of our community organizing work. And then we end it all with what we call a kickoff meeting, which is to let the larger community know that we are going to be having these community dialogues on a particular issue. So now that we're having community dialogues on a particular issue, have a couple sign-up sheets or whatever have you there, so people can sign up to come out and have a few different times or meetings that they would be able to show up and be a part of the community dialogues on whatever issue you'd like to have it. And I have this graph here in the middle. It sort of represents that you can have many different community dialogues going on at once, right? So when we're talking about doing community dialogues, we like to think of it in terms of, if you have a lot of resources, then you can support up, 10 or so, 15 dialogues going on simultaneously. If you are on a more modest budget, you may want to have community dialogues, just 1 or 2 going on at one time, right? Again, I am seeing the chat sort of being highlighted, but I won't be able to read it in real time if it's a long thing. So if you have a comment, just jump on in, or a question. Oh, Lion, yes.
What about the use of technology in these type of things? Like when I do these type of projects and stuff, might use SurveyMonkey document files, and I might give the options for people to actually voice their concerns and stuff, and actually have a documentation, or actually have a graph or something that is substantiable when I make these claims. I think that's a more of an equitable and a fair way of approaching things, especially in COVID. Like, a lot of people don't want to touch things and pens and stuff. And I think that by making it like email approach and stuff of that nature, or make it touchscreen approach, is more interactive on that level. Like, those are some of the things I've seen with the use of technology when engaging in civic issues and things. What's your thoughts on that?
I do want to say thank you for bringing that up too, because the way I was just describing this right now was typical. I don't know why it's taking me so long to adjust, but I'm explaining this in pre-COVID terms, right? So yes, doing things, via Zoom, not necessarily in person anymore, because we haven't done anything in person in quite some time now. But yes, that's a very good point. So all you're doing is pretty much thinking of how you want to engage folks. What I've been doing over the last year is thinking of what the goal is in whatever interaction I want to have with the folks, and how can I then transition that into doing something online, whether it be Zoom for folks who can use Zoom, or what is that other one, meetings that folks use. Sometimes it's a chat on your cell phone, right? There's WhatsApp, there's different types of apps or group chats that you can use on that to stay engaged with folks and invite folks in to conversations and certain issues or certain initiatives happening. So those are some of the things that I have used. I know there's a ton of them now, right? There's totally a lot more options for us to be using online. But thank you for raising that up too. When I am generally speaking about the process that we use, it's typically from the realm of in-person meetings, etc. But we have been changing a lot of this, right? Like, I have a slide later on about what the typical community dialogue looks like. Now it looks different because we're on a screen. I see another question or comment that came in through the chat. You can just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm in and out. That's why I can't sometimes speak. But
I'm sorry.
the issue, my name is Doris Maldonado, and the concern that I've seen for my communities with disabilities and without is the technology furthers a divide. Especially during COVID times, we've seen a great impact. Some of our people with lower income or homeless or are youth in care, so they don't have the bandwidth, the connection, the education on how to even access some of these conferencing opportunities, even with telehealth. My organization is running telehealth education, free webinars, but how do we access those people that don't have the access? The state-funded phones also had a limitation. They had for almost a year unlimited time with the state-funded phones, but now they were brought back in about last June. So there are barriers everywhere. So technology is not always a go-to, and we've seen that especially during COVID.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for raising that point too, because I know a lot of the work that I've done has been within cities. So in terms of, certain people not being able to have access to the internet or not having Wi-Fi, whatever have you, one of the things that has happened is I didn't know this before COVID at all, but so forgive me if I don't know enough about it to answer any questions, but there are certain like buses or whatever have you, where if you drive it on a certain block, like everyone on that block will have access to that Wi-Fi, right? Yes. See, I didn't even know what it was called. Thank you.
Right,
so
and there's a problem with that as well, because so many people are trying to get to those hotspots and trying to access it. I don't know if anyone remembers the dial-up from decades ago, but that's how it seems in those phones and with our people trying to access that. Everyone's saying, go to the local Dunkin' Donuts. That's not even feasible, and especially in the winter, a lot of our people suffered because of that. They couldn't make the telehealth visits, and it was really disparaging. We're hoping now with the opening up more, the community centers, the faith-based organizations, that is definitely out there and affordable, but not typically.
Okay, Thank you for
Thank-
keep raising that. What I do want to do is sort of revisit that in a little bit, because I do want to hear more and hear from other folks too about ideas on, you know, how can we address that, right? Because that is something, again, I'm a city guy, so when folks bring up, you know, issues from rural areas, I'm not always on the cusp, or I'm not always right there to understand or even provide the best feedback possible. So that's why I appreciate us working in a group like this, where we're able to throw ideas around. And I see a hand again, Lion.
Yeah, I want to, what I mean by the use of technology, like some of the things, you can use a flip phone to respond to some of the things that are being presented, or also tap in onto the conversation. So when people use the limitation of technology, they might not know how to use the technology per se, or something of that sort. But I look at it as that it comes up to the ultimate of the choice if you have time or not, and if you want to make the time for this situation. Especially in COVID like 19 right now, a lot of people are on restriction, and it's coming down to like a lot of people are not even working. A good majority of people. So it comes down, if you want to make the time and the sacrifice to actually want to move ahead. And I think that some people, you need to present that to them. And I'm a little bit of more of a go-getter in my community, and I've seen how technology has worked in positive ways to get things done. I just think that there's a little bit more pushback on it because people are more held accountable with technology. You can actually count the score with an individual on what they're doing and where people are actually signing on to. Like that's where it's, I think that there's the drawback where there's the accountability phase that's even that people will see. Like if like even before you even bring up to like legislation or anything like that, what is the thoughts of the community? What are they what their thoughts and feelings might be on this? And you have like a small like I say a small spreadsheet or small data understanding of what might be going on. And like some of it could be based upon if you're going up to the visual person face to face and you can input the data yourself. So it comes to how motivated you are and if you want to get the job done or not. So like I when people say that technology is a barrier, it's only a barrier unless you make it a barrier.
Well, that's not necessarily it's like if they make it a barrier, because again, at least with this example in terms of rural areas, I have seen many a times where, I mean, with Everyday Democracy, I'm able to do workshops and trainings over Zoom or online or whatever have you. And per usual, I think in fact with, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, but she wasn't able to actually, you know, have her video on and speak at the same time. Whereas typically that's what we would ask people to do. So sometimes technology can be a barrier. So what we have to do is, like to your point, what I think you're getting at, Lion, is saying that how do we address those obstacles? How do we work around those things in order to still get the input from?
Yeah, and also, but majority of people have multimedia purpose phones. So when I hear, yeah, it might be an older demographic, maybe that's not being accessed as much, and there might be alternative ways that you might be able to get their input. But to say that to just say that technology is just not useful and just throw it out the window, I don't think that's the right way when we have Bitcoin and we have other things that's going on. And our neighborhoods certain neighborhoods, like I'm from a Black and brown community. So when people say it might be a little rural, whatever, but the thing is, we need to have access to technology. We need to be exposed to these type of things. And I feel that people that are like saying that we're shouldn't have access to it is only going to hurt us in the long run. That's the reason why I'm pushing the technological aspect a little bit more, especially when I see the automation of jobs and other things of that nature.
Yeah, and I just want to keep in point too that no matter what, like it may be the wording of technology being a barrier, but the fact of the matter is if you don't have access to certain types of technology for whatever reason, then that would be a barrier. Say if I would like to do an online dialogue, right? Or this event right now that we're into, right? If someone is in the area where they're not able to actually access the Zoom link and then access the video or have their audio go over the airwaves, that I think is the barrier that we're actually addressing. It's not necessarily that technology is a barrier, but when you don't have access to the technology being used, right? So I think there's a differentiation that we need to be clear about. But I do see a couple of other comments coming in through the chat. Okay, I'm just seeing yes, access. Okay, keen. All right, so I will keep going and keep the comments and questions coming in, please. I appreciate it. So one of the things that Everyday Democracy likes to do, once we have the dialogues, and we'll talk a bit about the dialogues in the next couple of slides, is we break it up in terms of the 6 session dialogues. So when we're doing this, we're doing continuous community engagement. And to Lion's point, right, it is about getting input from the community members, right? So the first couple of sessions we have in dialogues, remember we have typical 4 to 6 sessions. The first couple of sessions are just about relationship building. Who are you? What brings you to our community? What brings you to this community meeting, etc. Those type of things, and getting to one another as people first, right? Because one of the things that we had, I'm sorry, I cannot remember your name, who had mentioned it when we first began, is how do you see issues addressed in your neighborhood or in your community? When we mentioned social media and how sometimes social media is somebody getting on the platform and using it in a way to, criticize someone or put someone down. And I think, and we've all probably seen a lot of the negativity that can happen on whether it be Facebook or Twitter or whatever have you. And I think a lot of times that happens because we're not seeing each other as people in that moment, right? So what we like to do with our dialogue process is make sure that we humanize one another in no matter what our political disagreements are or whatever have you, but we're able to have a conversation with one another, get to know one another as people first. And then in session 3 and session 4, we talk about the social issue that we really want to address. Introduce that data that was brought up earlier, right? What are the demographics? What are the important issues that are facing our community specifically, right? Because there are certain trends that happen nationally, certain trends that happen regionally, and certain trends that happen locally, right? So what does that information and data look like? And having a conversation around that. And then during the last couple of sessions, what we want to do is really have a conversation about brainstorming what can we do as a community to address this issue. And as you see on the right-hand side of the diagram here, it's what can we do as individuals, right? So there's a little individual change that happens by being a part of a community dialogue. There's collective action that can come from being a part of community dialogue. And then there's institutional and policy change, right? And I'm going to keep referring to Rashad's presentation earlier, where he talked about using those small wins to work towards a long-term goal, right? And that's what we think of in terms of doing individual change and collective action, which leads to community change, is those things, use those as building blocks to get to that institutional and policy change. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Again, jumping on questions, comments, etc. In terms of organizing, we want to build a coalition, and this comes from this helps with resources, right? Who are the people and who are the organizations that are able to donate time, money, spaces, etc., things of that nature. And then you want to take time to recruit your participants and your facilitators, and then make sure that you train your facilitators in community dialogues. You don't want to have people having these small group conversations, which can really get heated because a lot of times there's different opinions on any political issue or any social issue. So you want to have people who are trained to navigate that type of conversation. And when we talk about training facilitators, what Everyday Democracy likes to do is think about neutral facilitation, where the facilitator, his or herself, themselves do not take sides. They're not necessarily a part of the conversation, but they make sure that the conversation maintains focus and that everyone's perspective is heard and respected. So in that way, we can take notes during the community dialogues and take those notes to make them actually move towards action, right? So any action idea that comes from us as a group, it is literally coming from us as a group because it encompasses everything that we discussed in session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4. Lion? Wait, should I keep calling you Lion? I just want to make sure I'm not being disrespectful.
No. Lion Roland. It's an acronym. I'm a Lions Club member from the London Lions Club, so it's not a big deal. It's all right. It's all good. The thing that I want to bring up, it was 2 things I wanted to bring up. It was about, one of them was about coalitions. It's kind of hard, depending on what demographic you're a part of, to build a coalition with somebody when you cannot hold the other parties accountable per se within the demographics of that coalition. So that's like,
I'm sorry, could you explain that a little bit?
Meaning that, like, for example, like if you're building coalitions with different groups of people, the people that are part of the party, you have to hold them accountable within that group. With like, what if they don't want to do what's best for the group or what the group agreed upon. So where are the repercussions of that? And those are some of the backlashes about bringing on board coalitions. When I hear that word getting tossed around per se, I have nothing wrong with it. And also the big thing comes with like a drawback with coalitions is like when it's a minority, it normally takes the absence of Black men. They normally put in the spaces of other demographics, and sometimes they even throw a white man into a minority position. So they over and steering the conversation. So it's no longer the people that were disenfranchised. It's the people that are basically, one would say, oppressing us or oppressing the individuals. So like when you have those type of things that go on with a coalition, how effective is it? Then the other thing I want to bring up is when you bring up the saying that all perspectives should be heard, some people will like beg strongly to differ, especially if somebody had like very racially charged behavior and language. I really think that like democracy now and certain organizations should take more of an active stance when people are saying things that are disrupting the harmony of society. I think that we as organization leaders should take more of an active stance. I've seen when other organizations have not done that, and it hurt their membership, it hurt their credibility, and it hurt their morality. So, like, what would you say to things like that, if you mind me asking respectfully?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm hearing two comments.
It was two comments.
The first one, yeah. So the first one about coalition and responsibility. And to that, I say that's being very clear about the goals that you set when you first get going, right? And saying, these are the things that we're looking for. This is the things that we're looking at for. And part of what I want to do with you all later is thinking about who would you want to reach out to help support your work, right? So once you know what your goals are and you know who it is that you want to support your work, when you go to them, be 100% clear into what it is that you are expecting from them and making sure that they're 100% clear on what it is that you are going to be doing. So then that way there doesn't leave any space for misinterpretation, right? Or space for someone to be lacking, because if someone is lacking, then you can, revisit the conversation or whatever have you, and, even ask them, hey, you said you wanted to do this, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, whatever. We noticed you haven't been able to. Is this still something that you're interested in doing? If not, it's okay, no hard feelings, but just having something being very clear in terms of what is expected from me and what is expected from you. That, to me, I think is the best way to get at that lack of responsibility that can happen. Because, like you're bringing up, what I've seen before is people will get on the coalition to be on it, but then when it comes time to, we need people to actually give time, to give resources, et cetera, to, a movement or a project, then it's crickets, right? But if when you're joining the coalition, and it's very clear that by being a part of this coalition, these are some of the things that we're asking you to donate, then there's no space for miscommunication, or it's you can't say, I didn't know, right? So that's what I would say to that. And in terms of all perspectives being heard, right, that is an excellent point. And I do think that is something that not just the Everyday Democracy, but any organization, whatever have you, that focuses on doing community dialogues, we do have to be very clear about egregious statements or what's the word, or something that is very, very racist and inherently racist or inherently homophobic or transphobic or whatever have you, right? But at the same time, we would be disingenuous if we pretended as if those ideas were not out in the community, right? And that's why I cannot stress enough why the reasons why session 1 and 2 are so important on relationship building. But hold on real quick.
My thing is to give them the latitude or platform to speak those things. Is that appropriate? The thing is, these conversations like that have been detrimental in those type of spaces and have threatened marginalized certain groups. So by creating that environment, by allowing them to speak, how beneficial is that?
Well, when we talk about allowing them to speak, right, are we talking about, so I'm going to get to these slides in a little bit, but if we're talking about there's 10 people in a community dialogue and you have one person or maybe even 2 people who are speaking this way, right, they are still in a room with 8 other people who may not agree with them. So that's what we're about. When you put together a community dialogue, you want some sort of diversity. So then that way, what you don't get is someone who gets on the platform and then begins to speak out on certain things that are, hateful or hurtful or super offensive or things like that. And also, because I'm running through it really quickly, so I wasn't able to address this, but being very clear that we do set group agreements in these community dialogues, similar to the group agreements that we had in the first breakout session here, where it's making sure that we are respectful, right? Everybody gets their fair hearing. Nobody speaks for another person. If we're going to be discussing something, then we're going to be discussing an idea or a topic. We are not going to be attacking people personally, those type of things. So if you set the context and the tone for your community dialogue with those group agreements, it's very much less likely where you'll have somebody coming in there being, very blatantly racist or very blatantly homo or transphobic or very misogynistic and things like that. Sometimes and then we also have a group agreement in terms of an oops and ouch moment, where it's sometimes a person is not able to express themselves in a way that would be socially acceptable. And as a participant in the group, you can say, ouch, because the way that you said that really doesn't work. That really doesn't work for me. And I understand how that could be hurtful. And then that person being able to explain themselves in a way where they are not trying to cause harm. So I am moving through this very quickly, but I'm happy you are raising these points, because it's very important to be clear that when we talk about community dialogues, we're not just talking about, sort of how Val was talking about how issues can come up during a town hall meeting, where now it becomes a free-for-all, right? But we are setting very clear group agreements with one another. And when we're having that conversation, we all are there for a particular reason, because we want to get to move somewhere together in unity as a community, if that makes sense. But again, thank you for the comments and questions. Those super appreciated. Anyone else want to jump in, please do, because I love the conversation. So this is what a typical community dialogue would look like pre-COVID in person. We write down our notes on chart paper. Nowadays, when we do them, people are using like Google Docs or things like that to keep a track of all the notes. 10 to 12 participants meeting up to 6 times. And again, we want to have diverse participants and opinions in the room, right? And not just racially diverse, diverse by gender identity, etc. All of those good things. So in that way, whatever ideas come from the community dialogue, they're representative of the diversity within the community. I see a comment coming through. I can't read it. It looks very long. So if you want to jump in, that would be cool. And just share your thoughts.
Well, yeah, it's just that,
yes.
Just to address, you mentioned, of course, the facilitator, the ground rules. That's important. And of course, for these dialogues, you don't have just people talking to each other at will, like, a free-for-all. You have trained facilitators who are skilled and knowledgeable on how to manage offensive statements, racist statements. But the important thing to mention also is that these dialogues happen with a discussion guide that the facilitators are the ones asking the questions and offering people the opportunity to express their opinion, and having the opportunity for those who object to a comment that someone else might make to put them, to express their opinion. If they feel like they want to put them in their place, the facilitator will make sure that there's no disrespect on any side. It's all about creating a space that is respectful as much as possible. And of course, if a person becomes disruptive, the facilitators are trained to know how to deal with that.
Definitely. Thank you for bringing that up, Val. Thank you. Because I am moving through this very quickly, I think I have like a little bit more than an hour there. So I was very selective in which slides I put together and whatnot. So I appreciate certainly things need to be expounded upon. And then by the time we get to action, after we have our 6 sessions of dialogue, at the 6th session, people will come up with action ideas, and they vote at the action forum saying, these are the action ideas we want to move forward on. And then doing the action planning training saying, if we have 3 action ideas, these are the people we need to connect to. These are the things we need to do to make this a reality, and then break it into an action team and making that happen, right? And it all takes planning and implementation. Because, it's like that Malcolm X, I think you had the quote, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. All right, and let's see another comment coming through. All right. So what some of the reasons why this approach works is because we believe in including many different voices, and it helps build relationships. You know, when we talk about community organizing works, it is all about relationships. We find when we invite people to come to events or things of that nature, it's because of the person who invited them to come. It's all about relationships, all about who you're connecting to, how you're connecting with them, and it helps build communities, build capacity, right? When we do our trainings with community folks, we don't just do organizing training and do the organizing for them. We show them the tools and tips and techniques, and in that way they're able to do it on their own. The same thing with facilitator training, and the same thing with the action planning training. So in that way, community members are able to take upon the work that they would like to carry on. And then we do focus on racial equity explicitly, but not exclusively. And being very clear about this sort of is one of the things that mitigates racial issues that can come up during the community dialogue that Lion had mentioned earlier. Certain egregious statements. I won't take too much time on this slide because it seems like everybody here is very familiar with equity. It's been a term that's been used a lot. But one of the reasons why I do still use this old school racial equity explanation slide, because I know this one has been used a whole lot, is because I do find myself working with people, or at least initially working with people who have no clue what equity is. So this is sort of like that 101 slide to show people what equity is and what it means, right? Some people, it's been superly overused, and there are other ones. Some results that come from dialogues are, open space for people to talk about difficult issues. Like was mentioned earlier, social media may not be the most welcoming, warming place, but with our group agreements, dialogues are able to be that space. We're able to hear community members who usually don't have a voice, the people who are not necessarily comfortable speaking at town hall meetings, et cetera, and diffusing tensions between groups, right? So to Lion's point, sometimes people may come in with opposing political viewpoints or social viewpoints, whatever have you. And because there isn't a safe space for people to have those outside of our community dialogues, or there's very few safe places you can have them, this is the place where we can hash out ideas and get to know one another better while we do it. Without being disrespectful. And we are coming up with the ideas as individual community members working together as a collective, right? And that's very important.
I have an odd question, respectfully. It's regard to
Yes.
What if the people don't want nothing to deal with the leaders that are currently in power, and they organize themselves to get their own leaders? How could one that's observing some of these things that are going on help with that process?
In terms, when you say help with that process, being help raising,
like help organize them. They might need help
from within the community.
Like, for example, like you might have a group of like 20 or 30 group of individuals that's saying, hey, we might not like this politician we might not have in office, but we might want to look for a candidate on our own that's going to represent our views per se. This is all hypothetical. Mm-hmm. Is that something that Democracy Now! Would actually help to support, because that is something organic and from the community?
Well, everyday democracy doesn't necessarily, help people choose political leaders. We don't consider ourselves, a right or left, organization, whatever. But
no, but
what we have,
what I mean is like organize the process for them. Actually, like how to set up a candidate screening. I think that's something that Democracy Now! Should be able to help, because that is neutral. How to help them enroll the candidacy process. That's something neutral that they can help out with people that are very interested. Those are the things that I'm more or less pointing out that are neutral, that I've seen Democracy Now! Have presented. Is that something I haven't seen it been presented like locally here, but nationally, but I'm aware of?
Yeah. So what we do as an organization, what we would do is say if somebody goes through the process or someone's interested in becoming, a more formalized community leader, we're there to help coach them through the process as they do that. But that's not necessarily something that like we wouldn't put on the website, like we provide coaching for, someone who wants to become a state legislator or representative or something like that. That is not necessarily what Everyday Democracy does for its regular routine work. But what we have seen happen though is, say there's an organizer who wants to be a more formalized leader or facilitator, or even someone who participated in a community dialogue and they want to become a more formal leader, whether it be running for an office or whatever have you. We have been there, to, maybe help them brainstorm along the way, walk with them through as they go through the process. That's a possibility though. So it's one of those things where we don't have a formalized process to do that work, but if someone is choosing to do that because we do offer community support services, that is not necessarily 100% outside of what we would be working on, if that makes sense.
I'm just saying from Missouri, or what I've been seeing in my community and other communities around America, that might be something that you might want to invest into or have an interest in, because there's a lot of people that, I'm not being judgy or anything of that nature. They might not like what's going on, but they might not have the tool, the proper mentorship to go about going about that process. And who will want to go through the same process of the other people if they think that that process is wrong? So if they need help with designing something of that sort, that's something I think Democracy Now! Could help with the process of, based on their skill set and stuff. Am I correct?
Yes, definitely. And to that point, so say and Val just brought this up, so I'm so happy Val is here, right? Because this did not come to the forefront of my mind. Is there are academies that do offer support for folks like that. Now, what Everyday Democracy can do, especially with our network with something like the Civic Ambassadors or our Anchor network, right, is figure out who is it that's in your area that's doing that type of work and connect you with those folks, right? Because generally speaking, the folks that are in our network are like-minded in terms of racial equity, in terms of organizing, grassroots, et cetera. So then that way, whoever we connect you with, not you personally, but whoever we connect folks with, they are actually, sort of similar minds. So then that way, you're going through that process with someone who is more trustworthy, if that makes sense. So I appreciate you, Val, for the assist there.
Thank you, Mr. Val.
Yes. So I did show the slide for the individual change and the collective action. And then lastly, just being very clear about institutional and policy change that can come from holding community dialogues, which some of them that we've seen are hiring practices, policies being more explicit as they address racial equity, increased community input because dialogues have become an embedded part of their community engagement work, and then budget changes based off of, action ideas from dialogues. So those are some of the core things that can come from our dialogue work. Before I move to the next piece, I did want to time check with Zoya because I knew I had around about an hour, but I'm not sure where I am now.
You're good, Sagacity. You've got until 4:45. Okay,
sweet. So for this next piece, I would like you all, we're about to get into small groups for about 15 minutes or so. Think of a project or an event or whatever have you that you're working on, some sort of initiative, right? Or it could be your regular work. And then think of at least one person in one organization that you would like to partner with, or someone who would you like to support your work. And write them down. It could be an individual, maybe you met them here today. It could be someone who's a state rep or a legislator or something like that. Or maybe it's a local business that you would like to, that you would like to donate to your work, any type of partnership, right? And then once you're in your small groups, speak to your groups and say, this is what I'm working on, and this is the person or organization that I want to work with, right? And then develop what we call a pitch for that person, right? So how do you invite that person, or how would you invite that organization to now support the work that you're going to be doing? And the way we do this, and this is part of what we go through one of the things we go through in our organizing training is you want to begin, and this goes to Line and I's, the conversation we're having beginning was when in terms of building your coalition is first explain what it is that you're doing, right? And then tell them what it is that you want to get out of this partnership, what it is that you want to get out of your project. And then why does it matter to that individual? What makes it important to them as an individual, and why is it important to their organization or group? And then be very clear about what you're asking them to do, right? Do you want them to show up financially? Do you want them to show up to a meeting? Do you want them to show up to an event? and then give them a way to contact you. So if you could do this within your small groups, like I said, take 5 or so minutes to do it on your own, and then workshop your ideas within your small group. And if I'm not sure if all of our moderators are still here to sort of guide folks through the process, that would be great. If not, you're all civic ambassadors. I trust you to be able to work this out. So we can do that for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and try to debrief with one another for the last 10 minutes of our time together. Is
Right,
any
so
questions, comments? Yes.
Well, I just wanted to let people know, we don't have moderators for this section of the agenda today, but as Cassidy mentioned, I trust you all. And so we'll stay in the big room for 5 minutes so that you can have the slide in front of you if you want to take notes on it, or take a picture for later. And then we'll break you into groups so that you can have that discussion portion.
Yeah, and I'll also put links to 2 handouts we have on developing talking points and recruiting folks, so then that way you'll have them. So, all right. So I did just put the handout for developing talking points in the chat. So if you can click on that, there's the second page is where you'll see the write-up on, how do you develop the actual pitch. All right, so that's it right there. I just put it back in the chat for the talking points piece.
I'll put you in your groups now, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes.
Hey, Elizabeth, how are you doing? I haven't seen you in a long time. It's great seeing like, oh wow, I didn't even
Yes, I was muted.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Good to see you.
She was in my group.
Yeah, I feel weird now. Like I hate to take this moment to like shout out all the people I haven't seen in so long.
I know,
like,
it's
Sandy
true.
Rodriguez in here. Like, oh
Right,
wow.
I know. I
Yo,
see
Cassidy, nice to see you.
Hi, Sandy.
You too, Val. I see you more often still, Val.
Cool.
But I haven't seen
Good to see
Cassidy
you.
in a long time.
Yeah, it's been a minute. So before we wrap up, I did want to give folks a chance for comments, questions, whatever have you. I apologize for the Google link with the restriction access, but I did want to make sure I give everyone at least something concrete that can be used. I think that's really important when coming to these type of things. So any comments, questions about talking points or doing the pitch or whatever have you when you're working with, trying to look for community partners to work with? Did you find the questions useful, the prompts useful to come up with your statement? All
I
right.
like the one thing that Danielle said in our group about the whole idea of collective impact. Sometimes we only think about, well, how does this affect me? But the thought of, whoa, duh, what's the collective impact of what we're going to do, the project, whatever it might be, benefits the common good everywhere.
I think that Cassidy, I want to mention something that I learned recently that is about how we sort of come to these problems with a deficit mindset, where we think about like, what is missing? What are we lacking and all of that. So you really need to sort of come at certain things from the opposite angle, which is like, what assets are there and who is really interested in making a difference? Because a lot of times our approach to change has always been sometimes, I guess, I would say grass tops, because if it's being led by certain people that have a different mindset than when it comes from like a grassroots approach, right? If you have an issue, you want to be the person that resolves that. You don't want an outsider coming in and telling you what's right for you, how you should do things. So I think like that, thinking about resolving our community issues from a deficit mindset is very different from like thinking about what assets do we have.
Definitely. And I super appreciate you way much more like now than I did, as much. I super appreciate you anyway, but just the fact that you said that, which is a total lead into the other handout I wanted to send you all, which was asset mapping, which is, pretty much looking at your community from an asset-based viewpoint and then saying, who are the people, where are the places, where are the organizations that, can benefit me on whatever journey I'm on and what I'm trying to do. So then that way, those are the folks that you want to reach out to and partner with and develop a pitch for, inviting them in and to collaborate with one another. So again, I swear I did not pay Elizabeth any money to make that transition for me.
Right. Yeah, and think about like people that you don't traditionally ask to join those groups, right? Because we always think about like leaders and people that are the loudest and people that have some sort of power in their areas.
Yeah, yeah. Because that's another thing that I love about everyday democracy as well is it's recognizing the leadership skills of people who are not traditional leaders, right? Because we have seen it where someone has been a dialogue participant because they didn't want to be a community organizer. They didn't want to get involved in all that. But after they participate, then they say, I want to do some more. What else can I do? And then they'll go and be a trainer. Then they'll, be an organizer for the next round of dialogues or whatever have you. But meeting people where they are and let them grow at their own pace, definitely.
This is a short.